The Cursed Asylum. It was a cold autumn night when Daniel, a paranormal investigator, arrived at the infamous Blackwood Asylum. The building, which had been abandoned for over 50 years, was said to be haunted by the tormented souls of the patients who died there. The asylum had been the site of inhumane experiments and brutal treatments that led to the suffering and death of countless patients. Over time, it earned a reputation as one of the most haunted places in the country. Daniel was known for debunking ghost stories, but Blackwood was different. This place had a history that made even skeptics uneasy. The stories that circulated about it weren't just tales of ghosts. They were accounts of violent hauntings, with visitors claiming to be attacked by unseen forces or driven to madness by the whispers of the dead. As he stood before the towering gates, Daniel could feel a chill run down his spine. The building loomed like a decaying giant against the night sky, its broken windows like hollow eyes staring back at him. The entrance was overgrown with ivy, and the once grand sign that read Blackwood Asylum was barely legible. Despite the unease gnawing at him, Daniel entered the asylum, determined to capture any evidence of paranormal activity. His equipment included high-tech cameras, EVP recorders, and thermal scanners. He believed in rational explanations, but Blackwood's dark history intrigued him enough to push his boundaries. The moment he stepped inside, the air turned heavy with the scent of mold and decay. The walls were peeling, and the sound of dripping water echoed in the distance. The place was deathly silent, except for the faint creaking of the building as it settled in the night. Daniel's footsteps echoed loudly as he walked through the crumbling hallways, his flashlight casting eerie shadows on the walls. He began his investigation in what was once the main ward. This was where the worst of the experiments took place. As he set up his cameras, he noticed something strange. No matter where he pointed the camera, the screen showed faint, ghostly figures standing at the edges of the frame, always just out of focus. But when he looked with his own eyes, there was nothing there. Brushing it off as a glitch, Daniel moved deeper into the asylum. He reached the therapy room where it was said that the most disturbed patients were treated, or tortured. The room was filled with rusted beds and restraints. Chains hung from the ceiling, swaying slightly as if touched by an invisible breeze. Suddenly, a cold draft swept through the room and Daniel's thermal scanner beeped. A large cold spot had appeared in the center of the room, but there was nothing visible there. He turned on his EVP recorder and asked, "Is anyone here with me? Can you tell me your name?" For a moment, there was only silence. Then the recorder picked up a faint voice, a child's voice whispering, "Help me, they're coming." Daniel's heart skipped a beat. The voice was clear and filled with fear. He played it back several times, trying to make sense of it. The asylum was supposed to house adults, not children. Why would a child's voice be here? Before he could think further, he heard footsteps behind him. He spun around, but there was no one there. The footsteps grew louder, moving closer. Daniel's flashlight flickered and then died, plunging him into darkness. Panic began to set in as the sound of the footsteps stopped right in front of him. He quickly switched to his night vision camera. As the screen lit up, he saw it, a figure standing just inches from him. It was a woman in a hospital gown, her face twisted in anguish. Her eyes were hollow black pits, and her mouth was frozen in a silent scream. Her hands reached out for him, fingers long and skeletal. Daniel stumbled backward, but the figure didn't move. It stood there, as if trapped in a loop of endless suffering. As he backed away, more figures began to appear, patients of the asylum, their bodies showing signs of the torture they had endured. Some had burns, others had twisted limbs, and one had its mouth sewn shut. They moved slowly toward him, their expressions a mix of agony and hatred. Desperately, Daniel ran out of the room and down the hallway. He could hear whispers all around him, voices pleading for help, crying out in pain, and others threatening him. "You can't escape. You'll join us. You're already dead." He reached the basement stairs, knowing he needed to find a way out, but the air grew thicker, almost suffocating. As he descended, he saw flashes of memories that weren't his, visions of patients being strapped to tables, doctors performing unspeakable experiments, and the asylum staff laughing as they watched the suffering. The basement was even darker than the rest of the building. Daniel's breathing was ragged, his fear almost overwhelming. He knew he should leave, but something compelled him to continue. He reached a door at the end of a narrow corridor. It was marked Morgue. Against his better judgment, he opened it. The smell of rot hit him instantly, and his camera flickered. The room was filled with old rusted gurneys and body drawers. As he scanned the room, the drawers began to rattle. Slowly, they opened one by one, revealing skeletal remains and decomposing bodies. At the center of the room, a figure began to form, a shadowy mass that grew larger, taking the shape of something monstrous. It had no distinct features, just a swirling black void filled with the tormented faces of the patients. It was the embodiment of all the suffering and hatred that had taken root in the asylum. The mass surged toward him, shrieking in a cacophony of voices. Daniel tried to run, but the door slammed shut. The room grew colder, his breath visible in the air. He could feel hands grabbing at him from every direction, cold, clammy hands pulling him into the darkness. His mind raced as he tried to remember the layout of the building. He fumbled with his equipment, trying to find something, anything that might help him break free. But as the mass enveloped him, he realized that there was no escape. The asylum had claimed him, just as it had claimed so many before. The next morning, a search party found his equipment scattered outside the asylum, but there was no sign of Daniel. The footage from his cameras was corrupted, showing only static and occasional flashes of the tormented figures he encountered. The villagers who had warned him not to go knew what had happened. They had seen it before. To this day, no one enters Blackwood Asylum. The locals say that if you listen carefully on a cold autumn night, you can still hear the screams of those trapped inside, their souls forever bound to the horrors that took place within its walls. The story is a haunting reminder of the danger in confronting the unknown. Sometimes places of great suffering leave behind scars that can never be healed, scars that can trap even the bravest souls.